And I mean, imagine this team with Erik Karlsson. They're already a fast team, and you arguably get the best defenseman, or at least offensive defenseman in the National Hockey League, a guy who's not slow in his own right and can drive play probably better than anybody. I mean, that's a scary team already without him, and imagine him on that team. But getting back to the question, I mean, Perry would fit there. Maybe St. Louis is an option, but again, I think they're more looking for a center. So if Ryan Getzlaf was to be moved, I think that's
the Rangers
a backup option. Yeah, the Rangers are interesting, though, because apparently they have locked up a deal with Kovalchuk.
That's right. They want Kovalchuk.
Yeah,
that's
so
right.
they went Kovalchuk, and that looks like that's going to be the option for them. Honestly, I'd probably have to do a little bit more research into it and look into it, but I don't think a lot of teams can afford him. Maybe the Devils, to add a little bit more scoring punch with Taylor Hall. I don't know if they can fit it into their system. The Ducks have worked out some deals with the Devils in the past, of course, most recently with Adam Henrique for Sami Vatanen and sending Callum Palmieri over there. So it might as well send another Duck over to New Jersey if that's going to be the case. And I don't know. I don't know if there's a lot of suitors per se for Corey Perry as there would be for Ryan Getzlaf.
Yeah, no, I think everyone wants Getz. I mean, come on. He's not going anywhere, though. If the Ducks trade him, I'd have a lot of problems with this team. I might have to revoke my fandom for a little bit there. I would be really upset unless they got back some ridiculous return. I can't trade Ryan Getzlaf in any scenario. Not happening. He's a guy who's drafted, brought up through this team, and he's hopefully going to retire a Duck. That's just the way I see it going.
I hope they both do. Honestly,
I mean, yeah, but that means you'd find out that they're going to trade for somebody else. So let's move on to another example of what we've been talking about. Is it after the playoffs here? We saw Nick Ritchie, and I know we can't really just bash on him because there was only 4 freaking goals scored in this series, and only 2 of them were 5-on-5, and one was a fluke. To be honest, the Silverberg one was a fluke. Nick Ritchie, do you think that they're going to try to trade him at this point now? I mean, this is kind of what we got to talk about here, because if we're talking about moving somebody and bringing in a free agent, how about moving Nick Ritchie and bringing in a piece? Maybe bringing in another blue line piece to help out the third and develop more of that depth.
Yeah, again, I mean, I think it's a package deal if you move out Nick Ritchie. I'm not sure what you're going to get for him in a straight-up deal if he's the big piece, right? If he's the headlining piece of any deal, you're probably moving him for picks or maybe a struggling prospect from a different system, and then you're kind of hoping that a change of scenery for both of them would help out. And that's the type of hockey deal I would see for Nick Ritchie. It'd probably be for like a second-round pick or something like that, or for another struggling prospect, or you package him in a deal with a different player, whether it be a Silfverberg or an Andre Kasher or something like that, and you go for the big fish. You go for a Pacioretty, or you go for somebody of that nature that's going to be available at the deadline, and try and add that bona fide top left wing to your lineup that you haven't had. That's the only way I see him getting moved, unless they're ready to move on from him and they just try and get some more assets. But again, I don't know. I feel like he's the easiest guy to just move for picks and not have to worry about it, right? I mean, you've got maybe some guys who can step up into the lineup next year in Troy Terry, Max Jones, Sam Steele, that can just fill in right on his spot on the third line and probably do just as good, if not a better job. So maybe they just move on and get rid of him. I don't even know, though, if they're ready to, because they still seem to rely on him, and he doesn't get demoted too much for his play. They like to still stick him in on that third line. I think we only saw him get demoted once, right? When Troy Terry got put in the lineup, he got sent down to the fourth line. So
yep.
I don't feel like they're ready to move on, and I feel like, again, it's tough for Bob Murray as a GM to admit that he made a mistake in drafting Nick Ritchie 10th overall, and they're really all hoping he's going to just figure things out and be a late bloomer and get back to what they expected from him. I don't think it's going to happen, and I don't want to say I'm ready to move on from him, but if it allows a different younger guy to get in the lineup, then yeah, I mean, get some assets while you can, and just move on and hope that he does well in a different system, and deal with what you have in Steele and Jones and Terry and some of the other guys from San Diego.
All right, do you want to get to some of our questions, or do you want to hit the chat? What do you want to do here?
We'll go through some of the questions we have on Twitter because they're easier for me to access right now. We had a bunch of questions earlier in the chat, so we'll get back to them before we finish. But I'll go to Twitter right now because we had a bunch, and I mean the most of them are about kind of what we talked about on the last show, where it was a lot of it involving Randy Carlyle and Bob Murray. But we'll look into them. So let's see here. Victor said the team acquired some dinosaurs, namely Chimera and Kelly. Would the Ducks have been better off signing Marlowe and Thornton during the past offseason?
I mean,
the Ducks were in on
if you weren't going to pay the Marlowe contract, I mean, $18 million over 3 years is a lot of scratch for a guy. He's surrounded by fantastic players, fantastic young players who are speedy in Toronto, and I love that team. I picked them to beat the Bruins in 7 just so I can laugh at Eddie. He doesn't want the Bruins to lose. I would have been great, but I mean, Bob Murray came out and said he knew after that loss in Detroit that it wasn't the effort he was going to see, that they needed to go out and make a move. He felt like, this group's got to prove it, and that's why they didn't get anybody. And I agree, though, bringing in Captain Canada and Jason Chimera was probably the incorrect decision. Bringing in help would have been the right decision on there. Yeah. And I'm kind of disappointed in that move, to be honest with you.
He brings up a good point after that, too. If the Ducks had have gone out and got somebody last offseason before the season started, would they really have had to trade away Sammy Vatanen then? If they had that extra offensive piece in there that could have helped deal with the injuries rather than having to end up trading Sammy Vatanen and bringing in Adam Henrique, which of course we still love that trade, but it did expose a lot of holes on the back end for the Ducks, especially with Cam Fowler being hurt.
Yeah, I mean, how about you don't give Kevin Bieksa, a no-move clause before he wears a Duck sweater? And then that solves your problem at the draft, and you don't have to get rid of Shea Theodore, which ultimately pisses me off the most. Great player. I mean, there's no guarantee that he has the kind of year he's having now in Anaheim, but still, it hurts to see guys go off this team and play so well outside of your club when you just had him on there, so recently. And with the blue line depth issues, I'd have been way more comfortable with Shea Theodore on the third pair than I have been seeing Andy Welinski or Marcus Pettersson. No disrespect; those guys just aren't at that level yet.
Yeah, and maybe then you deal Vatanen before you get to that point at the fantasy draft, at the expansion
It was a fantasy draft.
Yeah, it pretty much was. You deal him then, and then you don't have to worry about giving up a guy like Shea Theodore just to pretty much get Clayton Stoner's contract off the books. I mean, they were going to take one of Vatanen or Manson anyway, because those were the guys you had to expose, because apparently you couldn't Bieksa couldn't waive his no movement clause. That was the weirdest story of that entire expansion draft, is that either he said no or they didn't ask him to, which
the rumor was they were going to ask him.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I never got a straight story from it, whether he said no or they didn't really ask him to do it because they didn't think it was the right thing to do. I mean, it ended up hurting them in the end, because if he does, then you can protect both Vatanen and Manson, I'm pretty sure. And then it comes down to them just taking, I think, I don't remember who's available at the time. It would have been like Antoine Vermette, or it wouldn't have mattered after that who they took, and you wouldn't have had to worry about giving up Shea Theodore. Not that having Shea Theodore here would have been, he would have been their savior, but you would have had him in the lineup right now instead of having Boschman in there, or Pettersson or Welinski to fill in. So of course that would be great. But it's easy to look back on it and say, yeah, that's the easy thing to do. If Theodore was here, they would have been fine. But of course he isn't. And we can all look back and talk about the Vatanen trade, talk about what happened at the expansion draft, and think of things that would have made it better, but it's kind of too late now.
No, I definitely agree.
So let's see. Clarissa brings up a question here that we mentioned on the last show, but she said, now that the Ducks have been swept, do you think there's a chance Carlyle is replaced? So we talked about the fact that if they got swept, that might be the only way we see Carlyle getting moved. So do you think, have you changed your tone from the last show? I think we both believed he wouldn't get moved out. But do you think now the fact that they've got swept and embarrassed by the Sharks, that maybe he's on his way out?
No, he gets the injury. He gets the injury pass. He gets the hall pass for that. It's nothing's changing in management. I can't see the Sam Willies going to Bob Murray and be like, you got to fire your coach, when they had like the third most man games lost this year. And Kessler's learning how to skate over again, still doing all kinds of treatment and in pain. Mm-hmm. And you know what? He's icing the team that Bob Murray put in front of him. I mean, you got to look at it from that point of view, too. I mean, if you have a team like Pittsburgh with, Crosby and Malkin and Letang, and you're getting crushed night in and night out, then you can't really go to your GM and be like, well, I need a better team. It's like, no, dude. You need to figure out a system that works around these stars.
Yeah.
The Ducks, I mean, they don't have that kind of star power, but Getzlaf's elite. But they don't really have that upper echelon defenseman, that Norris candidate. As much as I love Hampus Lindholm, they don't have that guy. So looking at this team that they're icing every night, defense was kind of a problem. That blue line depth we always talked about just wasn't there in the long run. And you kind of got to look to Bob Murray and looking at his player and personnel decisions and wonder if he's made the correct choices and given Randy Carlyle the best team to put on the ice night after night. But the discipline issues is what bugs me about Carlyle. And I guess that goes all the way through the leadership of the team. You have to control your temper, control your team. The Ducks took way too many penalties, and they've kind of been known for that under both Carlyle and Bob Murray, right? Yeah. So I don't think that changes, though, right? As long as you have the same leadership on your roster, you're not going to get rid of that effect. And I think that they like that old school, quote-unquote, branded type of hockey.
Yeah, I think so. And that kind of goes into our second question, which is what do you think is the real problem with this team and how is it addressed in the offseason? I think that's the real problem with this team is the philosophy and the style they have set up is it just doesn't work anymore. And that's doesn't seem like it's going to change with the current regime that's in place in Bob Murray and Randy Carlyle. Unfortunately, I mean, there's a lot of other issues that the Ducks have to deal with, but I think it all stems from that, really. I mean, there's definitely some issues up front in goal scoring, and they could really use another top six winger, but they've always needed a top six winger. There's now some issues with depth on the blue line, but I feel like those come behind the issues we have up front and with the system in place and with the way the Ducks play and the style they play.
Yeah, and I mean, not to bash the franchise too much though, because you got to look at the conference finals that they've been in, deep playoff run, specific division titles. It's not like this team is garbage. I'm not saying that, but if you're at that window where you need to win, there's got to be changes. I think the single-handed, thing that we need to change, like you said, is philosophy and systems. Yeah. Things aren't working, and maybe that big style of dump and chase hockey, grind it all along the boards and get it to the front of the net just isn't going to work anymore. I don't necessarily think that just throwing speed on a team is the answer because you have to have guys that can play. Yeah. And, that Carl Hagelin didn't work in Anaheim. He's one of the faster players in the league, and he didn't work out here. He got moved mid-season, or not even mid-season, right? It was pretty quick. It seemed like he didn't get a lot of games in before he was gone. I think that's exactly it, though. I think it's a philosophy and a system issue. They need to figure out that power play. It's a shame. The kind of talent that's on this team and not able to produce there, I would definitely have to go with systems and philosophy. I agree with you on that 100%. And it kind of starts with Bob Murray.
Yeah, and on the note of Carl Hagelin, too, I mean, Daniel brings up a good point. He said it's hard to play the speed game when you don't have many speed players. And I think that, I guess, kind of fits into that.
We talked about that. We felt like the Ducks aren't too slow.
They're not too slow, but their system doesn't utilize speed. Right, I mean it's dump and chase. It's along the boards. It's heavy hockey, and it doesn't utilize the speed per se. I mean they've got some faster players, of course. Andre Kasha, Ricard Raquel, Cogliano, Silverberg to some extent as well. Adam Henrique isn't necessarily slow, so you've got some faster guys, but the way they set up isn't really set up to utilize the speed in the lineup. They're set up to be that type of physical, big-hitting Western Conference team of the past along the boards, and it's getting exposed against some teams that really know how to beat that. I mean, the Sharks exposed them for that, and they let them go to the outside. They said, hey, if you want to play along the boards, go ahead, play along the boards. We're going to shut down the center of the ice, and we're going to limit your chances. And they did that, and I think that's the first time that I've seen where the Ducks have really been exposed for the way they play. I mean, we've seen it at times during the regular season, but for a stretch of 4 games where they were just completely outplayed because of the way they set up and the way, the physical brand of hockey that they play. I don't know if that signals change or not, but it should.
We were talking about it, and the way they play, they cut in on the half wall and look for the trailing guy, look to throw it in the front of the net, and it seems like by the time they did that in the Sharks series, that the zone was just clogged full of players. You got to be able to create on the rush. That's what speed teams do. So, yeah, I think it's definitely a systems thing. And looking at the chat really quick, I was seeing here, it says, you're more of a prospects guy, Eddie, so maybe you can help me out here. But Daniel in chat says, Murray's been drafting a lot more speed-skilled players the last couple of drafts. They're just not ready. I mean, obviously, I know Max Jones, I know Sam Steele, I know Maxime Comtois, but is there anybody else in this system that maybe